When we read this yesterday, I read it, I must say, came across the wire while I was on the air. It struck us all how powerful it is and how pointed it is. You are calling for all of these CEOs to step off. Let me ask you why you wrote this op-ed, and most specifically, do you believe in your heart of hearts that if all those CEOs pulled off all of those counsels today, it would affect what President Trump either thinks or the positions he takes?
I don't know whether it would affect what he thinks, but I think this is a president who, more than any other president, respects people who've been successful in the business world. I think if he were to be deserted en masse because they decided collectively to send a strong signal, I can't believe he would fail to hear that signal. And I think there's certainly a drastic need for an adjustment when the President of the United States is equating civil rights activists with white supremacists. And so, yes, I think it would be constructive for the presidency and, much more importantly, constructive for the company. I think also that if you look at any of our major companies, they look back at their history with pride, but there are things they regret. Their treatment of Jews or gays or African Americans or women decades ago. And when the history of many of our leading companies today is written decades from now, the moment when their CEOs stayed with President Trump will be a moment that's regretted. That's why I so admired, because it wasn't the easier course, the step that Ken Frazier of Merck took, the step that the CEOs of Intel and Under Armour took, the step that Rich Trumka, the head of the AFL-CIO, took. And it continues to be my hope that as they see what is happening, as they listen to their employees, as they listen, in many cases, to their children, that CEOs will say, I need to provide input to the government of my country, but I don't need to be part of President Trump's once a month, if that, photo op. And I shouldn't be lending my reputation and my company's reputation to him, given all the values, the civil rights, justice values, the integrity values through profiteering, the international cooperation values with steps like the Paris breakout, that I shouldn't be lending my reputation and my company's reputation to this president. I hope and I kind of expect that more will come to that conclusion.
So, Larry, there clearly is a very important moral element to this, and it comes across very powerfully in your piece. Other people have spoken about it. There also is the business side of it. In this instance, do you think those are perfectly aligned? Are you at all sympathetic with an argument that says, yes, there's a substantial moral issue, but I have to think about my shareholders. I have to think about my business. I have to think about business I may have with the U.S. government, things I need for them. Is that simply irrelevant, or is the moral just too important to miss?
I'd make these points. First, Merck stock rose as Ken Frazier resigned, and the president lashed out with a tweet about controlling Merck's prices. So there's no evidence that it's directly harmful to shareholders. Second, by encouraging the president to stay away from his embrace of white supremacy, he might return to the economic issues that are important for many of these companies. You know, the purpose of yesterday's press conference, as it was billed by the White House, was to focus on streamlining infrastructure approvals. That's something that's hugely in America's economic and corporate interest, and that was entirely lost because of this. And so if we bring the president back to economic issues, that will be in the corporate interest. Third, I guess I've been round long enough to believe that ultimately doing the right thing tends to work out for the best. And there are large numbers of people in my children's generation who are going to judge these companies, who are going to think about what kind of company they want to work for, who are going to think about what kind of company they want to buy from. And those who choose to align themselves with this, I think they're going to pay a price. Now, to be fair, David, there's a different consideration, which is I think there are some CEOs who fear the president's retaliation against their company if they resign. That's why I advised a number of CEOs who asked me not to join President Trump's councils, because I told them, I think things will happen with good probability that will make you want to resign, but you'll find that a difficult act, and so you're better off never joining. But now that they have joined, if a group of them leave, there is surely safety in numbers. There's a Congress that's watching. There's a press that's watching. If the president tries to sick the IRS or tries to sick regulatory authorities on those who oppose him, he will reap a firestorm. And so I don't think that business has something to fear. And I guess I'd say something else. If I'm somehow wrong and institutions, huge institutions, the Walmarts, the Boeings, the JP Morgans of this world, really have to fear retaliation from the government of the United States directed by the President of the United States, if that is a valid fear, our democracy has come to a place where it's even more important that we all do something. Now, I don't think that is a valid fear, but if it were a valid fear, that is more reason for them to gather together in a group, seek safety in numbers, and send a strong signal, not less.
So, Larry, given the moral imperative you see so clearly, let's talk about Gary Cohn just for a minute, or for that matter, Steve Mnuchin. There's a report out in the New York Times today, you may have seen, that Gary Cohn was very dissatisfied as he stood there next to the president yesterday. Given what you know right now, should Gary Cohn resign? I'm not asking will he, I'm asking should he? Because certainly if CEOs leaving his councils would affect the president, Gary Cohn leaving would have a much more powerful effect.
If I was working for a president of the United States who equated those marching for civil rights with white supremacists, some of whom had past connections to the American Nazi Party, I would resign that day. Now, that's my moral calculus. I can't walk in another man's shoes. I can't make the judgments of effectiveness, the judgments of ambition, the judgments of prudence that others have to make. So I'm not going to prescribe for Gary Cohn or any other particular official. What I would say is that I find it shocking and disturbing that there have been no resignations of principle from the political appointees in this administration. Take an example, David. The White House yesterday sent out talking points saying that the president had a great press conference. Dozens of people would have been involved in producing those talking points, disseminating those talking points, repeating those talking points to the media. Not one of them finds it so dishonest, so deplorable to be part of defending that press conference that they have decided to withdraw. You know, there were principled resignations from the Clinton administration over welfare reform. I didn't share the views of those who protested, but I admired their moral courage. There were principled resignations from the State Department at a number of different points in a number of different administrations over the United States, not standing up strongly enough for human rights. Now, when the President of the United States, not speaking off the cuff, but after 2 days of careful consideration, after a vast range of criticism for equating white supremacists with civil rights marchers, decides to double down on that position, and no one working in the political or legislative or communications parts of his administration chooses to withdraw, I have to say I find it very surprising. Look, David, I'm someone who's worried about the excesses of identity politics. I'm someone who argued and has some scars to show for it, for the importance of being supportive of the business community in democratic administrations. But there's some places where you have to draw a line. And I guess I would ask the CEOs who have chosen to remain, and I'd ask the officials in the administration, not the ones in the national security area who really do have a huge obligation to maintain sanity in our policy, but the political ones, the communications ones, the legislative ones. I'd ask them to think about the question, if this wasn't enough to get you to withdraw, what would be? Or is your position that you'll stay close to the flame of power no matter what happens? What would it take? What line would have to be crossed for you to step away? That's the question I think the president's colleagues, that's the question that I think many of the corporate leaders should be pondering this afternoon.
Right. Finally, Larry, you mentioned that the original news conference was scheduled to handle infrastructure, something you've been outspoken on. Another subject, tax reform, that you've been outspoken on. Are the chances of getting meaningful tax reform through the Congress lower today than they were 24 hours ago before this news conference?
Frankly, in my view, they were pretty low last Friday. They fell with the president's response the first time to events in Charlottesville, and they fell further yesterday. Tax reform is very, very, very hard. It's been 31 years since it was done on a large scale. It takes a popular president. We've got a president with a 34% approval rating. It takes a president skilled in working with the Congress. We've got a president at war with the Senate Majority Leader of his own party. It takes substantive and detailed expertise and craftsmanship in the Treasury Department. And we've got a Treasury Secretary who said at first that there wasn't going to be a reduction in the taxes on high-income people, and then changed his mind about that, who's set multiple deadlines that have already been missed. So I don't think we have the presidential popularity, the legislative skill, or the technical expertise in the Treasury Department that makes it terribly likely that we'll see any kind of substantial and comprehensive tax reform. Maybe there'll be some tax cutting, but I think the prospects for structural reform, which was the aspiration the president laid out, are minimal at this stage.